in me. If we can get a hold of that understanding of who you are, everything changes. Everything changes. Everything changes. We've been studying the Gospels, the Gospel writers actually, and seeing things through their eyes, and seeing how they wrote through their eyes, and seeing how they developed an understanding of who they were, whose they were, and how much they were loved, and how much more they were created for than they could actually see in themselves. I want you to sit back for a second, and I just want you to close your eyes while I read these couple of scriptures, okay? Because I want you to get this picture in your head about what I'm about to read to you, okay? So I know I told you to open your Bibles. You can close them. Just close your eyes, sit back, and just listen. It says, "And it happened, when he was in a certain city, that behold, a man was full of leprosy, and he saw Jesus. And he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then he put out his hand and he touched him. And he said to him, I am willing, be cleansed. Immediately the leprosy left him. And he charged him to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priest, and make an offering not for your cleansing, but as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded." Get that picture in your head of Jesus walking and this man crying out to him. Crying out in such a way that he wasn't really sure if Jesus would touch him or not. But he said, if you're willing. And Jesus lays his hand on him and said, I am willing, be cleansed. And he is instantly made whole. What an amazing picture that is. This past week, I spent some time in North Carolina with Fergus and Judy McIntyre, as well as Pastor Whitman Tolan and his wife Ressie, down in Greensboro, North Carolina. I can't fully describe all that God did yet. I can't. I'm up to 7 pages so far in notes for myself of the things that have happened. But I can say this. Welcome to a new chapter. Like, I am messed up. You have no idea. You have no idea. You have no idea. There are times when God will take you and just shake your theology, shake your understanding, and shake your how your normal way of thinking is, because it's wrong. Sorry, it's just wrong. It's not because it was what your understanding was, so you have to walk in what your understanding is, but there's a time when he says, come on, now let's take another look at this thing. And not that all my thinking was wrong, because it wasn't, but it's just a different place that he wants to bring me to. So Fergus and Judy McIntyre are, Fergus is an old school prophet. Would you call it, is that the way to call him? Old school prophet. I mean, he'd been around since Christ was an altar boy. It's been a long time. So he'd been around a long time. And he's been all over the world. And he's God's done some amazing things through him. Anyway, so I connected with Fergus over a year and a half ago through Pastor Brian because they're friends, and Steve and Reese and MC. And those of you that were at Jericho know who Fergus is. I connected with him about a year and a half ago. We've talked a few times online. We've Skyped back and forth so you can see each other and you can talk. But there's something about being together with somebody that's a little different. Yeah. So he was coming to the U.S. When I talked to him about a year ago, he was supposed to try to schedule us into his trip to the U.S. He was going to loop up through here. And something happened with his schedule, and it didn't work the way that he planned it to work, which is awesome because of, I'll get there. Anyway, so he'll be here next year, let's put it that way. So Pastor Brian called him and said, hey, are you able to swing up like we had talked about? And the schedule was he was booked solid. He was going to try to go from North Carolina to Canada, shift back down here for a day to be with us, and then go back to Canada. And we said, no, he's 73 years old, so it's a bit much for, yeah. And not even, that would be a bit much on anybody. So he said, why don't you guys come down here? So Pastor Steve and Pastor Brian and myself, we kind of went back and forth, and I said no. I mean, we just got back from Romania not too long ago. We're getting ready to start the shelter. We got all kinds of stuff going on here. Finances, to swing another trip, not so much. You originally said no. PB said, I'd love to, just can't do it. A few days later, I started feeling like I'm supposed to go to North Carolina. There are times when you just know something inside, like you start to feel something inside, and you're like, no, that's not really. And then it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to go to North Carolina. So I talked to my wife about it, and we agreed, for some reason, I'm supposed to go to North Carolina. I don't know how, but we're gonna work it out. So a couple days later, I felt like I heard God say, somebody's going to give you an envelope to cover the trip. I said, well, that'd be nice. The week went on and went on. I didn't think anything about it. I got home it was a Sunday, and it was one of the rare Sundays that I actually was able to sit and watch football at night. And it popped in my mind. There was no envelope. I said, oh, geez, I guess I missed that one. My wife came home a half hour later with an envelope that somebody had handed her. In that envelope was money and a little sticky note that said, love God on it. Come on. The following day, somebody else bought my plane ticket. Okay, God, what's going on in North Carolina? That's where I was at. What is going on here? Another person sent money in. I said, geez, what is happening in North Carolina? So then Steve thought he might be able to go. PB was going to try to be able to go. A day later, Steve couldn't go. A day after that, PB couldn't go either. I said, all right, I'm going to North Carolina by myself. This ought to be interesting. So I booked the trip to North Carolina. Had things squared away here. Went down to North Carolina. Now, mind you, I've never met Fergus and his wife in person. Never mind the church that they're at and the team that are at none of them. Never met them. So I went to North Carolina. And if you remember, a couple of Sundays ago, I told you that I felt like God said, season change. We're going into a season change. And one of the things he showed me on that season change was, this is the way he talks to me because it's the only way I'll understand sometimes. This was going to be an Easter egg hunt. And I'm like, okay, I'm going on an Easter egg hunt in North Carolina. Season of Easter egg hunting. This was just a piece. Anyway, so I got to North Carolina. I went over, got to my hotel, checked into the hotel. Ferg called me when I got in there. I flew into Raleigh, North Carolina, which is about an hour and 15 minutes away from the church. So it was like right in the middle of Raleigh and Charlotte. The church was right in the middle, so I could have flown into either one, and it would have been an hour drive either way. It didn't make a difference. Till I drove into Greensboro and realized there's an airport in Greensboro. No idea. So I got there, checked into the hotel. Just prior to that, Ferg called me. I had just got off the plane and said, "Where are you?" And in his Australian, yes. And I said, I'm probably about an hour away, because they wanted to do dinner already. And I said, I'm about an hour away, so just go do your thing. And somebody had scheduled a massage for him at 10 o'clock at night, so he didn't want to miss that. So I drove in, checked into the hotel, stayed at the hotel for the night. The following morning, that night he called me back. He said, "Hey, come over here tomorrow morning." He said, "I have a meeting at 10. He said, "I'll call you after that meeting, and then we'll get together." I said, "Okay." I'm not one to sit around much, so I just drove around, learned the area, whatever. I found my first miracle, which was a Krispy Kreme. Dan got that one. Anyway, so drove around for a while. He called me after his meeting. He said, "Hey, get over here, mate." You know how he says it. So I go over to his place, and I go up to his room, knock on the door, and he and his wife greeted me at the door, big hugs and stuff like that. "Come on in, sit down." And we sat down, we talked, and we spent some time together there. Just got to know each other, you know. We went to lunch, talked at lunch. There was one moment during church that he spoke a word over me, but there were several words that he spoke throughout the 3 days I was there, like several words. Yeah. So I spent time with them through lunch, and we decided how many of you have had a sozo session so far? All right. So those of you that have had this already will understand this. Those of you that won't, when you do, you'll understand it. Because every one of you should be in a sozo session. Sign up back there, by the way. So we started talking about the things that God's doing in me. Not so much in the church. In this point, we're talking about what God's doing in me. You know, and stuff like that. So we finished lunch. We talked about some stuff about the church, and he said, "Hey, come on back to the hotel." So we go back to the hotel, and we go sit down in this area outside, and his wife sits down, pulls the notebook out of her paper, and says, "I'm just going to write down as we talk." I'm like, doing a full-out sozo session on me in the middle of Greensboro, North Carolina. That's exactly what she did. She wrote notes, and she handed them to me after. Here you go. Anyway, so we talked for a while there, and I'm not going to get into all that right now. I will eventually. So we talked for a while there, and how many of you have heard me explain him as the Australian version of PB? Like, that is in so many ways true, but in so many ways not true. But in this way, it was absolutely true, because it was 3:15 in the afternoon, and he's mid-sentence, and he's... I mean, just out. His wife is... Yeah, you're all laughing because you've seen PB. Yeah, you get it. All right. Anyway, so he says, I gotta go have a nap. So go have a nap. So he goes upstairs to have a nap. I go back to my hotel, get ready for church that night. I still have no idea why I am in North Carolina other than to sit with them. What's going on at this church? I have no idea. The church was right around the corner from his hotel. Big church. I think he said it was 80,000 square feet, the building. Massive. It was a furniture store. It was a furniture manufacturing place, I think, or something like Thomasville. Yeah, it was a big building. Anyway, so I walk into the church, not knowing what I'm walking into, and it feels like home. Like, it feels like home. How they dress, how they talk, how they act, it feels like home. I'm like, all right, this I can do this. So I walk in, and I see Ferg, and he's yelling across the room, and I go up, and he said, "You're going to sit with me right here," and he is right in front. Now, if you know me, I don't like the front. Helen, we got this thing going on, put me in the back. Anyway, not to mention, for me, I wanted to kind of sit back and just watch. Anyway, so you sit right here. So I said, okay. And the usher comes over and says, "Ferg, we already reserved all these seats." I said, "Listen, I'm good. I'm going to go sit in the back." So I snuck away while he was arguing the point. And I found my way to the back. And they started worship. And worship was good. Their worship was no flash. It was all heart. You know what I mean? Like you feel here. You know what I mean? It was worship, which was awesome. So they finished worship, and the pastor got up and spoke briefly and brought Ferg up. And first thing Ferg does, "Where's Tom? Where's Tom?" Drags me up front, has me sit right in front of him. Nobody in the church knew who I was, and they didn't need to. Just dragged me up front, sat right in front of him. He spoke his message. It was a good message. The same message that God is speaking across the board. Identity. 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 Identity to the point where you are a child of God. That's who you are. And you have a daddy. See, I call him Papa all the time, you guys hear, but it's the same term of endearment. Ferg is using the word daddy. You got to relate to him like that. And he begins speaking this message, and he spoke the message, and then he works a little different than PB in the fact of PB will, as you guys have seen, will walk around and shotgun blast people throughout the room. He calls them up. So he called people up and speak a word over them, and then shaka baba bang, they're on the ground and everything else and stuff like that, and they're out. Then he calls all the kids forward, because they're a church that also believes the kids need to be involved with things. We have the kids in here during worship. They need to be here. He calls all the kids forward. Now there's probably, I'm guesstimating, somewhere between 30 and 40 kids. And he lines them the whole front of the room, like the whole front, and lays hands, bang, 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 40 kids out on the, I mean, just, I've never seen anything like it. If it wasn't rude, I would have taken out my phone and taken a picture, but I didn't. 40 of them out in the power of God. I'm like, this is nuts. We go to dinner afterwards, and this was where I met Whit, who's the pastor there. And he pulls up in this fancy GMC Denali Yukon. That was a nice car. Anyway, says we're going to Thai food. I was like, oh God. Never had Thai food. Didn't really want to have Thai food, but just went along with the group to have Thai food. So we go to this Thai place, and we got to talk for a while, and Whit started telling me a little bit about the church and how the church got started and stuff like that. And I got to talk to him about how we got started and how Lisa and I got to be here and stuff like that. Just real kind of a get to know people session kind of thing. And the Thai food was not horrible. I found something on the menu that was not spicy, so I was good. So we had dinner late at night, and just said we're going to go back to the hotel. So we went back to the hotel, and Ferg says to me, "Hey, tomorrow morning, we're going out." We're going to go have coffee while the ladies go shopping. I said, okay. So the following morning, we were supposed to meet at 10 o'clock over at Ferg's Hotel. And I got to his hotel, walked him down to the front door, and Whit and his wife pulled up, and he says, I'm sorry, you just walked into a whole lot of GMC. See, I'm a GMC guy too, like he is. So he's got this massive Yukon, and his wife's got a Denali, and they just whatever. So they go shopping, and we're going to go for coffee. So we're going for coffee, and Ferg and Whit are catching up on stuff, and I'm hearing, a lot of where they came from and the movement that they came out of, the C3 movement, City Church out of Australia. It's now called C3 here in America, but they came out of the City Church out of Australia. And Whit begins to explain to me how things went for his church. See, he had been senior pastor in this church for 19 years, but prior to that, he was I don't know if he was the assistant or the associate pastor at another church before he was sent out to start this church. And when he moved into this church, God grew the church to 800 people. That's cool. Grew it to 800. And then I forget how many years it was into it, but God started talking to him about what he wanted him to do in the region, in the area. And it didn't necessarily jive with the direction that City Church was going. Not that what they were doing was wrong, and he made sure that I understood that. It was just something he felt God was doing in him for his church. So they decided to part ways. So they went off of City Church to be an independent church. Over a period of time here, the church went from 800 down to 200. Craziness, just madness. But what I learned about Whit and his wife is they have a uncanny ability to lock on to what God said and not let go. Like not even remotely let go, regardless of what's in front of you. So what happened is they somehow, as they were growing into this massive church that they had to move into a new building. And I'm probably going to get some of these details wrong, so if he's watching this, he's going to give me a little grace for this anyway. So as they were growing, he was driving one day and he saw this furniture store, and he said, God said, that's your building. There's a furniture store in it. A couple of months later, the furniture store went out of business. It was now empty. So he went to the owner of the building. And, I forget how it transpired, but either way, they ended up in this building. Like he walked the grounds, praying over the grounds, because he knew it was where God wanted them. And I got it. They went to talk to the owner, said, we want this building. The owner said, somebody else just leased it. And it was a few months gone by, the lease fell through. So they called him back and said, hey, you want it, it's here. So they moved in. They moved in, and they had raised, they had saved about $500,000. The building, so they had saved about $500,000. They fundraised another $250,000, and then had a line of credit for another $250,000. So they put $1 million into the building. So while they're in, now remind you that, so they're a big church at this point. They're in this building, and the numbers, when they made the decision, started going down. All the way down to 200, about 200. But he knew what God said. And he was not letting go of what God said. Period. No matter what. And he believed what God said. And he just pressed into what God said. So then it came time, at some point in this time frame, that the owner of the building came forward. They started getting behind on their rent. Their rent was $33,000 a month, I think. Yeah, it's a lot of money. Yeah, he said it like it was nothing. I was like, I almost threw up when he said that. It was like 33 or 37,000 a month. It was something ridiculous like that. And they had started getting behind in their rent. At one point, they were 600,000 something behind in rent on this building. And the owner came forward and said, hey, we're going to sell this thing. So they put it up for sale on the market. And Whit went forward and said, well, we want to buy it. Long story short, the building went on the market for like $5.5 million or something like that for the property. And the bank took the $1 million that they had into the property as collateral and allowed them to buy the building. See, because what happened is Whit heard this word. There were 8 people that were going to contribute $1 million each to the project. $2 million had already come in. He's still waiting for the other 6, but $2 million has already come in. And he hung on to that word. So the bank agreed to use what they put into the building as collateral and sell them the building, and their mortgage is $20,000. Think about that for a second. They were paying $37,000 or $33,000 a month. Their mortgage is almost half of what they were paying rent. God started giving him vision for the building. He saw a food pantry in the back with racks of food and a yellow hand truck, a yellow forklift. And they just prayed into that, whatever you want to do, God, and just prayed into that and just declared over it, this is what you said, I'm standing on this thing. So as time has gone on, they had a lot of space in this building. They have a big sanctuary. A sanctuary will hold 1,000. God has told him and his wife, both completely independent of each other, prepare for 1,500. Like not to get, like he spoke it to both of them without telling each other that he said it. So they're preparing for 1,500 now. So the sanctuary will hold 1,000. So when they go to 1,500, they're going to do 2 services. In the meantime, they still have a lot of space in the building. Like I said, 80,000 square feet. I think it's 80,000. It's massive. A charter school comes forward and says, hey, we need some space. Can we rent some space from you? He said, sure, but I don't have all the classrooms and stuff that you're looking for and whatnot. And so this charter school comes in and is now paying them $33,000 a month. They paved the parking lots, built all the classrooms to a tune of over $600,000 in upgrades in the building. Now think about what I just said. They're paying $33,000 a month. Their mortgage is $20,000. So now they're making $13,000 a month. I said, well, how long are they here for? He said, well, they're leaving in November. I said, oh, well, that well's going to dry up. That's what I'm thinking to myself. He says, but we got contacted by another charter school. They want to come in starting next year to pay the same thing. Holy mackerel. So we're at coffee and we talked about this kind of stuff. And then he goes, come on, let's go look at the building. And he walks me through the building. And the first place we pull up to, this massive food pantry. We walk in, it's full of racks, and there's a yellow forklift. 2 million pounds of food went out of there last year. 2 million pounds. They don't do the work for it. 1,800 families a month come into that pantry. He said something like 600 or 700 volunteers come into that place. They're not church members. They just come into that place to volunteer. The food pantry is not run by the church. It's somebody else that he gave the space to do it. And he's just believing that the spiritual atmosphere they're walking into is wrecking them as they come through. So we walk through this massive food pantry, through another set of doors to a school. that I didn't even know was there the night before. I was there for a service the night before. I had no idea the rest of the stuff was even there. And we walked through this school, and he starts telling me about the $130,000 sound system that they just put in the building. There are two guys, I guess Robert Plant just went on tour or something like that, whatever, and there's another famous one that he named. And he said there are those two artists right there, when they go to play somewhere, they call this sound guy, and they won't do it without this sound guy. He said, that's the sound guy that just came in and did our system. 130 grand. I mean, just ridiculous. The stuff that was in there, I don't know anything about sound, but you'd be happy, Dan, let's put it that way. Craziness. Craziness. They just believed God. $130,000. And just believed God. I get this tour of this place, and he says to me, Tom, and so him and Ferg, like, they tag teamed me all day long about the poverty mindset that we're carrying. Funny, because my wife and I, before I went, for a few weeks, have been talking about the poverty mentality and the poverty mindset. Just ridiculous. And how we're constantly thinking about not enough, or I could never afford something like that, or stuff like that. And he says to me, he goes, Tom, this is Pastor Witt. He says to me, Tom, I know you like my truck. And I said, I do. I like the truck version of his truck, like the Sierra Denali. And he says to me, he goes, you should go see my guy. He's 20 minutes away. I'm like, yeah, you go see a guy with what? He goes, come on, you and I will go up there, we'll lay hands on that thing, we'll shut that Baba say take care of Yama over this, we'll just, and I'm like, okay. And Ferg is telling me, Tom, it's not about stuff for you, it's about believing who your father is. You know, there were so many different ways that they said it between the two of them. It was like I got it whacked in my head with a hammer for 3 days of who your father is. And the orphan spirit and the poverty spirit that we're carrying, that we're allowing to be on us. It's not there anymore. They broke that thing off. I've got that all recorded. But anyway, enough so that so we drop up first. Got to go take a nap. Drop them off. We got a few hours before service that night. I can't sit still. That's when I met Rufus in the parking lot. And I took a ride to the car dealership. Walked on the car dealership. Found my truck. Test drove my truck. 60 grand. Hey, tax, title, and reg included, but 60,000. 60,000. And the guy says, well, what do I got to do to make you take this right now? I said, I'm a married guy. I said, if I wrote a check like that, I would not be a married guy anymore. I said, I got to talk to my wife. I got to go. He said, I'll call you tomorrow. I said, okay, you call me tomorrow. And all I'm doing, I'm thinking, the whole time I'm driving this beautiful truck, I'm thinking, this is stupid. Anyway, so I get done at the dealership, and I went for a ride. I grabbed the coffee. That was when I called my wife and we talked on the phone. And God starts to speak in more depth about the poverty mindset and the orphan spirit. And how the orphan spirit continuously says, I don't have a father that'll take care of me. Not only that I don't have a father that will take care of me, but one that would want me to have something like that because he just wants to see me happy. And the poverty mindset that says you'll never have enough to do something like that. Just messed me up in the parking lot. And then I met Rufus. So I go back to the hotel. And this is the stuff that's running through my brain on top of the multiple words now that I've been given through the time that I've spent with Ferg and Whit. And I'm sitting in the hotel getting ready for church that night, and God starts downloading this word for the church. And my mind starts going to, so I wrote little notes for myself and stuff like that, and I'm like, all right, that's what you want me to do, I'll do it. And then my mind starts going to, who the heck are you to come down here to North Carolina? You don't know these people. You're going to go give a word over the church, that kind of stuff, and blah, blah, blah. Word after, just crap after crap after crap coming in my head. And I get this one little text message from PB in that moment that says, I'm really proud of you. That just messed me up right there, and I knew I was supposed to give that word after that. I know you guys were here praying for me Thursday night because I was supposed to give that word. I walked in and I found Ferg because I felt I was under Ferg while I was there. And I found Ferg and I said, listen, I've got a word for the church. Whatever you want me to do with it. You want me to give it, you don't want me to give it, whatever you want me to do. He said, I'll call you up when it's time. Okay. They went into worship, and then worship went on for a little bit, and it was exciting worship. Like, I don't even know what they were singing. They don't know what they were singing because the whole thing was spontaneous. I think they sang 2 lines for 20 minutes. You know, all different ways, 20 minutes. We know but it was praise music, like it jumping up and down. It was like a mosh pit at one point. It was just, you know, maybe not that far, but it gave you the idea of what was going on. So it got down to a real intimate moment, and I started feeling this is where I'm supposed to give that word. And the pastor goes up and he calls Ferg and he says, hey, whenever you're ready, the church is open. And Ferg runs up there with the microphone and he calls me up. And he introduces who I am, and he hands me the microphone. I spoke that word to the church, and there's something about speaking into an atmosphere that's open. Like people are expecting to hear from God. I mean, it was like a pep rally in there. It was crazy. So I spoke that word, and then I had some personal words for Whit and Ressie, the 2 pastors there, and they let me pray over them, and they hit the deck quick. I mean, ouch. And they must have been on the floor for 15 minutes into Ferguson's message before they were able to stagger back up into their chairs. But when I handed the microphone back to Ferg, he looked at the church and he said, can you believe what he just said? Ferg's been going there for 19 years. Longer than that to that area, but to that church for 19 years. Along with other people that they bring in, spoke the same thing that they've all been speaking. Everything that was spoken was exactly what God had already said to them, which is nuts. Anyway. So I sat back down, Ferg gave his message that night, and then he called up all the men from the sanctuary. And I said, I've seen this last night with the kids. This ought to be interesting. Because the men were the ones that were doing the catching. So how is this going to work? Because the ladies weren't going to catch them. So I said to Ferg, I said, I'll just go with you. I didn't have to, though, because I couldn't catch up to him, and he just bang, bang, bang. And they were catching each other. And then that one would get up, and the other one would get bang, bang, bang. Just the whole room. Just ridiculous. Now, they had told me earlier that day that they wanted to pray over me that night. So he finished doing all that, and then they brought me up and, spoke some stuff that pretty much rocked me to the core. So get ready for it. Because of the words that were spoken over me were not only for me personally, they were spoken over the church. And I'll share those with you as time goes on, and I'm still processing all that God is doing. So, but here's what I did come home with that I know for sure. There's several things, but here's the biggest thing that I know for sure that I came home with. And the 2 of them just whacked it on me over and over and over and over. You got to get God's voice. And when you get God's voice, you got to partner with God's voice and believe God's voice, declare God's voice, declare what he said over it, and continue to believe. Because when you do that, you create space. Like you create space, a space that only God can fill. And he fills that space and brings it to pass. Yeah. Ferg said to me, he said, Tom, you are going home. He said, I feel like this trip, you're going home into a new chapter. And he said, you are going to speak grace from the top of the mountains. Grace is what this chapter is all about. Declaring grace in the middle of the impossibilities. Over and over and over. He looks at me, he says, Daddy's going to give you that truck just because he can. Not because you need it, but just because he can. He said to me, he said, it was foreign to you to actually go to the dealership and do something like that, drive something like that. He said, yeah, because of what you came up through. The culture that you grew up in, the culture that we grew up in, was you got to strive and work hard and just hope you get enough to take care of things. It's a poverty mindset. It's an orphan spirit. No, that's all still developing me, what God's going to do with that, but holy mackerel. I started writing down the stuff that I took, that happened and that I'm taking from North Carolina. I'm up to 7 pages already. I still have a ways to go. We have to create space. We have to. Whit said to me, he said, Tom, God spoke to me about this building. It's so funny that he brought me to that building, to that church that has the same mindset that we do, the same feel as we do when you walk in the door, the same heart as we do. How many times have we done food pantries? It's our heart. It's part of what we do. And he bring me into a church that has this food pantry. Listen, I'd love to bring faith. We've talked about bringing faith in with us before. We've partnered with Faith a ton of times. We've talked about giving her space. He said, I knew what God said. I knew what he showed me, and I just declared it and believed it and went after it. And Ferg says to me, he says, Tom, this is so much different than just that faith movement that says you name it, you claim it. That's not what this is. He said, this is a quiet confidence inside of you of who your daddy is. And believing what he has said. If you look at Luke chapter 5, Jesus, as he walked by this man, and the man cried out to him. Jesus knew what his father had said and laid hands on this man. If you study out the old times, you don't touch a person with leprosy. You don't go near them. They have to walk on the other side of the street and announce who they are. Unclean, unclean is what they have to say as they cover their face. Jesus laid hands on this guy, put his hand right on him. Can you imagine what the people with Jesus must have thought when he did that? But Jesus knew in his heart who he was and who his daddy was. He understood that. We studied the 4 Gospels to see who these guys were. Listen, they all had different traits. They all had similar traits, but here's one thing that they all had in common. They all heard God, they all saw God, and they all created the space for God to move. Because if you look at their histories beyond the Gospels, what they did amazing and ridiculous things. They did it because they heard the voice of God. God spoke it into their hearts. And they believed it, and that created that space that God could fill. Whit says to me, Tom, one of the things that I've done here in this church, because now they're up to probably 300 or so, and they're growing back up again. But what's happening is that which is on, one of the things that I noticed over the couple days that I was there, what is on Whit as a person is on his church. And he has decided that he just is going to believe the principles of the kingdom of God, and he's going to teach them regardless of whether people want to hear him or not. I'm going to do the same. Just crazy that God would bring me to the middle of Greensboro, North Carolina, to be with people I've never met before, in the middle of a place I've never been before, to start a new chapter. And I had to be there by myself to do it. He said, Tom, we're swinging at a home run right now. That's what Whit said to me about the building. We're swinging at a home run. He said, God spoke to me. 8 people would come forward, $1 million each. 2 has already come in. They're waiting for the other 6. They don't even think about finances. They don't. Ferg says to me, Tom, I understand who my daddy is. He said, I've never worried about money. Never. He said, at the peak of my ministry, I was making $500,000 a year. He said, never have I brought home less than $250,000 a year. To do itinerant ministry, that's just... Steve's like, sign me up. He said, I've just adopted the mindset of Isaiah 9:7, which is a scripture he spoke over me the night that he... look it up later. I can't go there right now. I'll keep you here all afternoon. And then he prophesied and prayed it over me the next day and broke the poverty mindset off through Isaiah 9:7. I got to read it. I have to. It says, of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. Upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice, from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. The increase of his government knows no limits. Remember, this is the kingdom of God we're talking about, not the United States. This is his kingdom. Knows no ends. There is no ceiling. And it's for the justice of the people and the judgment of the devil. Justice in what's been stolen. Justice in what we haven't received but we're supposed to receive. Judgment on all the crap that the enemy's done to try to steal, kill, and destroy everywhere he goes. Counter the end of that scripture that says, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. You study that word out, zeal. It's the passion of God. It literally means his passion. It's his passion to perform this over us. It's his desire that his kids walk in this. Man, that's a whole nother message that I'm still learning. This is the scripture that he spoke over me. New chapter of grace that we're walking into. There's so much more that I'm sure you guys are going to get going forward. But I sat in the airport because it was in Raleigh. I left a little early because I don't know the area, so whatever. So I got to the airport at 3 o'clock. My flight wasn't until 8. Checked the rental car in. Went over. Here, listen to this. I pulled up to the rental car. I walked up to the rental car place when I first got there. I had reserved a car online. I reserved my hotel online. I pulled up to the rental place. The shuttle dropped me off. I went over to get my car, and they're like, just take whatever comes out. I'm like, what? So they had just had the hurricane not long ago. And this company had put 1,000 cars out to FEMA workers. So they had limited cars left. They're like, just take whatever comes out. And So I'm watching these cars come out. Too small, whatever. I had ordered a mid-size SUV because I don't fit in a little car. Sorry, guys. And he goes, here comes your car right here. Pulls up. Infiniti Q60. Brand new. I said, this is ridiculous. I got in the car, drove about a block, pulled over, and I'm trying to figure out how to use the stupid buttons and everything else that was in this thing. And I'm in this car, like laying on the ground pretty much. You know what a Q60 is, right? Yeah, I knew you would. And he's like, oh my God, yeah, fancy car, whatever. And I'm trying to figure this thing out. And I look in the rearview mirror and I see a pickup truck. I'm like, get me out of this thing. I drove it right back around the block and got in the pickup truck and took that thing. But it's funny because God spoke to me about that later on too. The mindset. I was willing to put myself in what I felt like I should be in rather than what he put me in. He put me in this fancy car that had butt massages and everything else and air-conditioned seats and everything else, and I wanted to settle for the pickup truck. But if you think about that for a second, even in that pickup truck, he had me go test drive the right one. 60 grand. Anybody got that laying around? But God said you should give it. It absolutely is. Just craziness, stuff like that. So I sat in the airport for 4 hours or whatever waiting for my flight, and just it gave me time to just start processing all that God spoke. You're all going to get messed up, let's put it that way, over the next who knows how long. Anyway, so Whit says to me, Tom, he says, we are swinging at a home run right now with the church. He said, I'm just believing what God had said. I'm not letting go. Like they got this pit bull anointing on them that they're just not letting go. And God has met them every single time. So we're gonna continue praying for them, and I know that we're gonna connect with them on multiple different levels. That's for sure. Yeah. So, can you guys play? I want to. God said to me, he said, "Okay, Tom. So you have, whenever God speaks something into you, you have a decision to make. Either you're going to believe it or you're not going to believe it. And if you're going to believe it, you need to walk it out." I said, okay. Whit said, Tom, this is a home run we're swinging at. He said, you need to start with singles. Just start swinging at singles. And I started thinking, I'm like, we've done that. We needed 10 grand to get over here. We ended up with 13 grand and we're in here. Right? Then we needed $2,500 for the altar. And we raised $2,500 for the altar. Right? But the problem is we were settling in that altar. Because it wasn't the full altar. It was just the piece. It wasn't everything that we had pictured for up here. And the day, as you guys probably know, the day I called to schedule the guy to come build that altar, somebody stole that money out of our account. Forward 9 days later, Justin calls me that he booked his flight to come up here for our prophetic conference. We're supposed to pay for that flight. He sends me the bill. The same day, somebody else steals another $1,150 out of our account. PB gets on the phone that day, this time, because we've appealed, we've tried to do everything we could do with the first one. Nothing happened. The money was gone. So this time, the $1,150 was stolen. PB got on the phone. This time he got a believer on the phone. And she restored the $1,150 and the $2,250 that was stolen out of the account. And it was just a prophetic picture that God is going to replace everything that was stolen. But see, during that time frame, right, Mike? During that time frame that the money was gone, Mike came forward with a word on Thursday night that he felt like God was saying, don't settle. Like we were settling for the $2,500 altar rather than everything else that we wanted here to go with it, which I've estimated at about another $5,000 on top of the 25. And I said, okay, God, we're not going to settle. So even when the money came back, I said, we're not going to settle. That was the word that God brought in. Mike heard it. He acted in faith and spoke it out, and it bore witness in me, that's for sure, and everybody else that was in the building. So he said, well, I'm not going to do anything until the rest of the money comes in. And Whit says to me, Tom, that's awesome. Go with that. And he hands me a check for $1,000 to put towards that. We have to hear what God said. Then believe what God said, and that will create the space for God to fill and carry that thing through to fruition. I said, okay, God, what do I do next? He said, I'm going to tell you what. He said, I'll do all kinds of things, and this is awesome that you're hearing this word over the church. To hear what I'm saying, believe what I'm saying, create the space, and I'll fill that space. He says, but this is for every single part of your life. This Isaiah 9:7 is for every single piece of your life. You've got to hear what I'm saying, believe what I'm saying, act out on what I'm saying as I fill the space. And watch me take this whole thing through. I said, okay. There's hearing, there's understanding, there's believing, and then there's believing without letting go. And he told me, he says, tomorrow, Tom, when you go to church, he said, I want you to talk about that altar. He says, and I want you to sit there and tell them everything that I've said about creating the space. He says, but you've done this for too long. You've kept it to yourself. See, we don't talk about money in this church that often. Kind of funny that we don't talk about money that often, but we all have that poverty mindset. I said, okay, God, what do you want me to do? He said, you need to give them the same opportunity that I'm giving you right now. Believe what I said. Believe what I'm saying. If you would close your eyes for 1 minute. God's going to give you a number to sow into that altar. Most of you, he just gave it to you. You can open your eyes. See, God gave me a number personally. I've already sown into this altar. But he gave me a number. This is my number. I didn't budget this. I just heard the number that he said, and I'm believing what he said. I went to my wife. I said, hey, I need to write a check tomorrow. She said, okay. Didn't even ask me the amount. I went back to cut the grass. So I gave her time to think about it. I went back and said, hey, how much is the check? She's like, I don't know. I said, well, what number did God give you? She says, I don't know. And then she speaks a number. It's the exact same number that God gave me. We didn't budget this. I am just believing that this is what God wants. Because I'm not living in the poverty mindset anymore. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. No more. That's one of the reasons that we're here in Fall River, is to break that thing. In order to break it over a city, it's got to be broken over us first. See, the kingdom principle here is you don't write the check, he does. You just hear his voice and follow it. That's it. Regardless of if it makes sense to you or it doesn't make sense to you. Listen, you're not my provision. I'm not after your money at all. And that's why you don't hear me speak that message, because I'm